Welcome to the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast on YouTube. I hope this episode helps you break your next growth barrier. And if you enjoy it, subscribe to my YouTube channel and you'll never miss a thing. Well, whether it's staffing, budget, volunteers, or one of the many other things that hold church leaders back, overcoming growth barriers is the key to progress. So if you're ready to break your next barrier, the Art of Leadership Academy might be exactly right for you. Inside the Academy, you'll get access to on-demand church leadership courses, team trainings, and coaching calls with me. But more importantly, you're going to join a network of over 1,500 high-capacity church leaders. Some will be exactly where you're at, some a little bit ahead, but everybody in the group is committed to leading a healthier, growing church and supporting each other. So if you want to fuel your mission, not just by consuming more information, but by being in a community with people who will challenge and support you, then today's your day. Learn more and start making progress by visiting theartofleadershipacademy.com. And now to today's episode. Craig, welcome back to the podcast.
Carey, I am thrilled to be back with you. You know that I love you, and it's always good to hang out with you digitally or in person. So let's throw down.
Likewise, man. I'll tell you. Your new book, The Power to Change. I've followed you for years, as you know. I think I can honestly say it was in the 90s I discovered what you were doing when you were still a fledgling little church. Maybe it was the early 2000s. But I've always thought about you as one of the most disciplined people around, period. And as I've gotten to know you over the last, 5-7 years or so, I'm like, yeah, hyper disciplined. But that's not how you naturally see yourself or perhaps saw yourself. So can you take us back to younger Craig?
Sure.
Who was younger Craig?
Yeah, well, in the early years, the way younger Craig, the pre-Christ Craig was not disciplined at all. Just kind of anything goes. And then as a young Christian, I would say that I did the disciplines that mattered most. Like if I was as an athlete, and so I would go to practice or whatever. If I had a test, I'd study for it. But I just wasn't really good at the life disciplines, and I felt. Honestly, I felt very, very undisciplined. And like a lot of people will say, well, discipline's easy for you because you're just naturally disciplined. I would say that probably some people have a propensity to be slightly more disciplined than others. But from a theological standpoint, I would say that holistically, none of us are inherently disciplined because we're born with a sinful nature, right? And so we like to eat what we want to eat. We want to sleep when we want to sleep. We want to do what feels good. And so by nature, I would say that we are not highly disciplined creatures, but we have the power and the ability to choose discipline. And in many ways, if we take a theological standpoint, we could say that choosing the right disciplines is being godly. if we choose in such a way. So what I've learned is from years of research and a lot of work and a lot of failure and a lot of searching scripture, some principles that have helped me go from being what I would consider to be more naturally undisciplined to being a person with a lot of help and work is now very, very disciplined and thankful for the right disciplines.
How did that impact your leadership as a young leader? Like when you look back on starting out as a pastor versus how you run your life now, what were the implications of being less disciplined when you were younger?
I would say there's so many of them. So in the early years, I didn't pray faithfully with Amy. In the early years, I would study scripture to preach, sometimes more than I would for personal intimacy and devotion. There was a season, and I'm embarrassed to say this early on, that I was praying, publicly and didn't have a real vibrant private prayer life. And then in my 20s and 30s, I ate anything that I wanted and it didn't matter. And then when I woke up and I was old enough and it didn't matter. And so I wasn't sleeping as good, wasn't as healthy, wasn't as strong, wasn't as spiritually confident. And so the absence of the right disciplines or the presence of the wrong ones, robbed me of everything, like spiritual strength and spiritual confidence and personal confidence and health and vibrance. And then the presence of a few of them over time started compounding and bringing more and more and more and more of the stuff that it would be pleasing to God and being helpful in the world. And so to me, it's everything. I mean, I'm hyper passionate about it and want to help people create the right disciplines because they matter more than people could imagine.
Well, I wanted to start there because it can be an instant, like you are hyper disciplined these days, and it can be such a turnoff to leaders who would say, yeah, that's not me, so this doesn't apply to me. So I'll let you in on a little secret. I get the privilege, you have the privilege of working with your kids. I have the privilege of working with one of my sons. And we did a 360 last year, and it's all anonymous. But one of the questions was, how disciplined is Carey? So everyone's rating me like a 9 out of 10. And then there's 1, 5, or 6. And I said to Sam, I know that's you. And he goes, oh yeah, I know the truth. You're not disciplined at all. He goes, these are all learned behaviors. And I'm still struggling in some areas. So I think that's the good news, right? This is like emotional intelligence. It can be learned. Habits can be learned. And was there a turning point in your leadership, or was there a wake-up call, or like, how did you become such a disciplined person? Did something blow up in your face, or was it gradual over time?
I wish that I could say that there was a turning point and that, I read a book and it changed my life, or God spoke to me and it changed my life, but that's just not true. What happened is I started to recognize some things that needed to change. And I tried to change a lot of them and couldn't. I tried again and couldn't. And then one day I just thought, okay, I'm going to change one thing. And what I started to do, Carey, is I started just to recognize, and I do this now with our teams, we're going to do this next week when we get together, is we're all going to create one short-term goal to execute in our teams. If I tried to have them do 3 or 4, they probably wouldn't do any. But if they can do one, the one tends to cascade into other positive changes. And so I started adopting kind of one change a year, and I've been doing this now for 20 plus years. And what happened is nothing really big started to show up in the first year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. But after I had 5 kind of new disciplines in my life, or maybe the absence of a bad one, then I started seeing some really positive change. And then what started to happen is that it wasn't just exterior change, it was interior change, where I started to say, well, I actually am becoming a more disciplined spiritual leader. And my confidence grew. And then I started thinking, wait a minute, this is, if you invest money, you get compounding return over time. I started to get the compounding spiritual returns that made me really, really passionate about continuing on that path.
Now, you said this, you've got a number of good podcast episodes by the time this airs on habits, so people can definitely listen to that. But you said something really quick in one of them that I would like to go back to, and you said that you've struggled with imposter syndrome. Can you talk about that? Because I think that is a subject that comes up a lot when I talk to leaders, particularly when they have rapid growth. It's like, oh my gosh, like if people only knew. How has that impacted you, Craig?
I would say, and I'm guessing that that a bigger percentage of your leadership community probably will battle with this. And the reason is because studies show that those who are the highest tier leaders tend to struggle with this the most. And so I'm guessing that your leadership IQ, the average leadership IQ of your community is rather high because they're smart enough to listen to you, meaning like they are growing and they're investing in their own leadership. So I'm guessing a lot of people would do this. And I can just say from the earliest of any type of real success, I started to feel underprepared and unqualified. I bought my first few rent homes, and they were really small, inexpensive homes that I fell into kind of by accident in college. And so I was a landlord. And I remember being like 21, 22 years old saying, I feel like a fake pretend landlord. Well, the reality was I had 4 rental units and I was a landlord, but I didn't feel like it. Then I married Amy in my early 20s. I was just turning 23, and I felt like we were playing house, like we were not really, like we're pretend married. I had my first kid. I felt like I'm a pretend dad. As a pastor, my gosh, I felt overwhelmed. I'm 23, still didn't have my degree, and I felt like I was so far in over my head. And then 5 years later, we started Life.Church, and it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And so for years and years, I just felt unqualified, unworthy, not good enough. And you can be relatively successful for a while with that mindset, but eventually, if something doesn't change on the inside, your own limiting belief is going to become a limiting factor in the people you can impact. And so that's when I had to start working on growing through it. And it took some time. And there's still times when I feel less confident than I'd like. But it's something that I would say if a leader is battling with those feelings, let's talk about them, let's acknowledge them, and then let's find some help to grow through them. We can talk about how if you want to, but it really is important to, and that's why on my podcast, a lot of times I'll just try to tell people like literally, I believe in you. There's more in you, because I want them to feel that so that they can step into the fullness of who they're created to be.
You're so good at that. I mean, in our conversations and in the interviews we've had, you're such an encourager of people. And I mean, it's not like you do that indiscriminately. You have extremely high standards, but you try to look for the good in people. How did that work? Because I think you're right, like on the interior dialogue, if you feel like you have imposter syndrome, if you don't catch it early enough, eventually it does become self-limiting or self-sabotaging, right? Mm-hmm. You blow up the church because you think it's too big and you can't lead it, or the air just comes out of the balloon. Mm-hmm. This is getting a little bit into Winning the War in Your Mind, your last book. Mm-hmm. But when you go into that negative self-talk spiral, yes, how do you pull yourself out of that?
Yeah. So if you're asking, earlier you're asking about how do we do it for others, but if you want to go there, I would say that, I mean, even just last week, so my dad recently passed away, and I was having a tough day, and I was not as kind to my wife, Amy, as I would have liked to have been. And I walked away with that negative self-talk saying, I was saying to myself, you're a jerk, you don't deserve her. And it just, I mean, immediately I just went right back into that sense of shame because I was dealing with some sadness and took that out on her. And what you have to do is you have to just recognize, I mean, literally, when you're believing something that's not true. And this is really, really difficult, because if you believe something that's not true for a long time, then you just believe it. And that's one of the first things we have to do is, and that's why there are a lot of people right now listening that probably would even say, well, no, I don't really have imposter syndrome. I'm just really not good enough. I'm not, like they really think they're not, and that they don't realize that's what it is. And so we have to start by acknowledging it. And then we need to acknowledge that we need help. We need to change. And this is where a lot of, especially high caliber leaders, they think, well, that's weakness. And I would just say, admitting that we need help is never weakness. It's always wisdom. And we need to start there. So, any kind of change starts with acknowledging the change. You cannot defeat what you don't define. You cannot change what you can't confront. And so I'd start with acknowledging it. And then we look at what is the truth that replaces the lie. And the gift that we can have as leaders is we can speak life into others and help them become who they were created to be. That's one of the most important things that we do. There's me-centered leaders when it's all about me, and there's you-centered leaders when it's all about the person in front of you. We want to be you-centered leaders, and you do a great job of this. One of the reasons why you're one of the best interviewers I know is because you genuinely care about the person on the other side. You do your research and you pull something out of them, out of a care for them. And if we'll just care about the other people, then we just almost can't not encourage them. We see more in them than they see in themselves. We want to bring it out. We want to love it out, cheer it out, encourage it out. And that's something I feel called to do. It's not just a gift. I feel like it's a calling. And I think as leaders, we should all at some point embrace that as part of our calling as leaders.
Yeah, and you've made a lot of progress. I mean, in terms of declarations, in terms of weeding out the lies in your life. But I think you raised a really important point, Craig. I think particularly at this stage, you're kind of like, well, I hope I'd arrived. But there are elements of it that's still a daily battle, right? Do you find that?
No, I mean, it's kind of like in your spiritual maturation process, you kind of get the big things handled early on. Like I'm no longer, flipping people off, and I'm not getting drunk every Friday night. And then when you get to the things that are less visible, that's when it gets hard, right? When you're dealing with pride and you're dealing with envy, or you're dealing with private lust issues or whatever that no one else sees, that's when it gets more difficult. And I would say it's true with our confidence that, okay, so now we can get up and we can lead a meeting and, we're confident enough to do that, or we can do a presentation, or, I can actually have a difficult conversation with someone. You get through those things, and then the better you get at some of those things, the more aware you become of all the other things that you need to deal with. I mean, they seem like little things, but they're big things. Mm-hmm. I tend to speak over people. I get rushed, too excited. That seems like a little thing. It's incredibly rude and dishonoring. So that's one of the things that as small as that may sound, like, you can cheer on 10,000 people, but if you speak over one person and devalue them, that's not good leadership. And so that's one of the things I'm working on. Listening more than I talk with the people around me, is because I tend to think the leader in the room needs to talk, and actually the leader in the room needs to listen. So there's a lot of little things like that I'm always working on. And then even personally, it's I've been battling with shingles. Well, what is shingles a result of? Okay, that's a result of stress. And so in my mind, whenever I feel something stressful coming, I go through kind of a mental routine, almost like meditation, where I'm focused. I have something that's I could share it, but I don't want to bore people. But it is to calm me, to try to get control of my thoughts. And
do you mind sharing it? I don't think it's boring at all.
No, it is kind of boring. But what I do is there was a time when I was at a funeral and there was dead all around, and there was this one tree that was big and beautiful, and I just stared at the tree. And so what I do now is I picture it kind of like being a tree of life. And so I try to silence all of the noise around me, and I visualize that tree, and I slow my breathing down, and I think about words of life that, from scripture. So what that does is it's almost like meditation. It's easing my stress. And that's just something I'm working on now. And I would say that probably to really continue to grow in your leadership, you're going to want to have at least one thing, sometimes only one thing, that you're working on. And, at any time I say, hey, Carey, what are you working on? I bet you could tell me something right now, right? Mm-hmm. What are you working on?
Positive Kitchen.
Okay.
So we're early into the new year, a couple months by the time this airs. And my wife, Tony, and I sat down and I said, okay, how can I love you better as a husband? Mm-hmm. And she's an incredible cook. And she usually makes dinner. I'll help out a little bit. I'll do the outside stuff, the barbecue and that kind of stuff, and clean up. But I can get stressed if I've had a full day or dinner's running a little bit late. I can be a little bit critical. And so we are working on a positive kitchen, and that has nothing to do with her and everything to do with me. And you know what? Just by bringing it to mind, making it a goal, realizing you have an incredible woman you're married to. She makes great meals. She never complains, and you're a jerk. So be positive and encouraging. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Yeah. So whoever's listening right now, you're smart to listen to Carey's podcast. It comes out all the time. I would just say, what are you working on? And if you can tell us something right now, well done. And if you can't, let's come up with something just like that, something small. So, and then what that does is it's creating a win or an opportunity that builds your confidence, helps you become better. And you do enough of those, you're going to really make even a more significant difference.
So you started with flossing your teeth. That was the keystone habit that's in the book. You've talked about it. That was the first, I'm going to get disciplined. I'm going to floss my teeth. You can explain a bit of the background of that, but what is it for you right now? What are you're working on, I guess, decelerating the nerves when you get nervous and stressed and, that triggers your shingles. Anything else you're working on right now? Do you have a habit of the year?
Yeah. So the backstory is that I just hated flossing, and I decided to start flossing because if I could do something I didn't want to do, I was saying I'm overcoming kind of my feelings, and I am a disciplined person. And I joke around about it a lot, but it's not really a joke. If I do that in my mind, well, I might as well do my other disciplines. And if that one's not there, and I think it was Charles Duhigg in his book, The Power of Habit, who wrote about, if your audience hasn't listened to that, you'll want to read James Clear's book, of course, Atomic Habits and The Power of Habit are two of my favorite you want to listen to or read. And that's a habit that creates other positive disciplines. In my life this year, Carey, what I'm doing, that's more internal, and it's more recent just because I've been battling shingles. But I reestablished a habit that I put aside, is I did 5-year journals until I blew through a couple of 5-year journals, and then I thought I'd done it for a while, and I stopped journaling. So I picked that back up this year, which is actually pretty important in my mind, to document kind of what I'm learning, what I'm doing, what God is showing me, questions I'm asking. And what I like about the 5-year journal, if no one has done one or seen one, you don't have to write much, which is great, because I'm not good at writing.
I was just going to ask you, I've tried morning pages. Tell us more about that.
I've failed so many times, it's ridiculous. But the 5-year journal, if you can imagine, it's one book and you write 5 years in it. So it's that you can't write much. You'll write maybe 4 or 5 lines. And then what happens is, let's say today is February the 21st. And then next year on February 21st, you're going to look right below on the same day and see what you wrote a year ago. 3 years from now, you'll see in February 1st, 2025, you can look back at February 2022 or 2023 or 20, whatever, 20, whatever the years are. You look back on the same days. And what happened is several things. One is I realized where I had repetitive challenges. So I saw the things that I kept journaling about that I hadn't changed, and that brought to attention where I needed to focus. Another thing is I saw the faithfulness of God, because I was going like, yeah, and I thought that was going to take us out and kill us. And well, God got us through that. And so it made me think, well, a year from now, whatever I'm going through today, I'm probably going to look back at this day a year from now and say, God got us through that. And so it was like a spiritual part. And then it just became a great place to document anything, gratitude or, prayer needs or whatever. So I picked that back up because I set it down.
What does journaling do for you? I'm saying that as a fellow struggler and someone who for the last 3 or 4 years has picked it up again, but I keep changing forms about every 4 or 5 months. It's like, that's too long. That's too short. Yeah.
Well, if someone can write a lot, more power to them. I just never have. And so it's everything from capturing ideas to, like, you sent me 2 podcasts to listen to. And so I wrote down some of the big thoughts that I got from those. So it's capturing ideas, it's documenting, today my daughter turned such and such age and we went and did this. I am going to forget a ton of meaningful moments. When you write them down, you get to go back and revisit them, and you won't forget them. And I write it in such a way that if I lost it on an airplane, I wouldn't be embarrassed. So I'm writing it. It's very transparent, but it's also transferable, meaning if my kids want to have it one day to see the work of God in my life, I am writing it as if someone else might read it. Very, very personal, but not so personal that it would be embarrassing.
Not a confessional in that sense.
In some ways it is, but it's not to the level of, it's something my kids could read on purpose one day if they wanted to.
Yeah. That's really helpful. One of the things I noticed, and you can feel free to agree or disagree, but one of the things that got me moving from the, oh my gosh, I'm very undisciplined, I better pull up my socks, was I seemed to notice, and this started when I was in my 30s, that the leaders I admired most had not always extreme levels of discipline, but there was meaningful self-discipline and personal discipline in their lives. They were disciplined financially, disciplined in how they regulated their emotions on the outside, disciplined in their work habits, disciplined. I mean, you'd walk into their offices, they were tidy and neat. And I'm like, okay, there's something going on here. Do you think there is a direct connection between discipline and effectiveness in leadership?
I would say there's exceptions to everything, of course. I would say for the most part that most very successful people are radically and almost oddly disciplined, not necessarily in every area of life, but in strategic areas for what they do. For example, you might have a preacher that maybe is a little bit overweight, so they're maybe not as disciplined in the gym, and so they're not disciplined holistically, but they read God's word, memorize God's word, know God's word, and preach God's word. They may have 50 chapters of the Bible memorized because they're incredibly disciplined in God's word. So it doesn't mean that they're necessarily holistically disciplined. but I think would be hard to find anybody that's hyper successful that's not hyper disciplined in some areas of their life. And so what we want to do is we want to be as holistically disciplined in the things that really matter. For example, our bodies do matter, so we should care. Our minds matter, we should care. Our relationships matter, so we should care. But then we want to hone in on 2 or 3 or 4 disciplines that really create a compounding impact in the area of passion or ministry or profession that matters to us. And if you can find those that that really move the ball forward in your area, then get weird about them. I mean, like weird. If I told you some of the things, some of my disciplines, people go, "That's weird." I go, "Absolutely, just weird." I mean, normal gets normal results.
An example?
I mean, there are a ton of them. It's like from my sleep rhythms to from the crazy supplements that I take to how I measure workouts to what I eat, to when I eat, to where my snacks are, to what kind of snacks I have, to what kind of lunches that I have, to how I, my rhythms of relationship, of how I intentionally spend time with certain people, to learn from them, to praying with Amy at certain times of the day, to, when I study, when I don't study, when I make decisions. It's like my whole life is, it's been dialed in over the years, little change by little change by little change by little change by little change, into a very odd, very different, rhythmic, kind of boring, predictable life that works for what I do. I wouldn't tell anyone to copy it because it wouldn't be effective for what they do. I wouldn't brag on it because it's kind of weird. But it is what works for me to have the marriage that I have, to be involved in my kids' life the way I am, to be physically at hopefully the peak of whatever age I am, and to lead a ministry that is making a difference. And you cannot be undisciplined and have those things working well. You got to have some extremes. And so I would just tell your audience, don't be afraid of the extremes. Greatness happens in the extremes. Don't be afraid of the extremes. Find a few, 2, 3, 4 areas. If you're not doing something that other people call odd, you probably won't do something a lot of people call great.
There is a tendency on that note to want to be generalists today, to be up on social media, to be watching all the latest shows. I've thought about this, but in order to do what I do, I have deleted things in my life. So I don't follow sports. I'm sure if there's a Toronto team in the finals, I might watch the final series or something like that. I'm not that up to date on movies. I don't watch a lot. I don't read fiction. It's stuff like that. Are there categories to pursue what you're doing now, which is excellence in physical fitness, really building into your family, leading a church with 44 locations and counting, et cetera, et cetera? Are there areas where you've just like dropped entirely, where you're like, I'm not going to pursue that, even though a lot of other people pursue that? Or are you still like curious about things?
No. So I would say there are a lot of things that it would look like I do, but I've actually delegated. Right. So it would probably be scary for some people to know what I don't know and what I don't do, that it actually looks like I would know and looks like I do. So there are things that get done that are important, but someone else is getting them done. A lot of things like that. And so the more that you want to do, the more you want to narrow your focus, and then you want to give more away. As far as the disciplines, you could take any area of your life, and like physical health, there's so much to it. And in the early years, all I thought is, I'm going to go to the gym and get in shape. And so I went very, very faithfully, worked out, had a decent routine, and had a dad bod. Meaning, if I show you pictures of a certain season, you go, yep, that's a dad bod. Yep. And the reason is because I ate anything and everything that I wanted. So then I decided to eat healthy, and instead of getting a hamburger, fries, and a shake, I got a chicken burger, fries, and a shake. And I thought that was eating healthy. Like, I literally thought that was eating healthy. And then I recognized, okay, there's so much more to it. So I started learning, and it took me probably 10 years to dial in my diet. And then I started looking at what supplements that I would need to take, what type of vitamins, what do I need for my body? And so I go, it's, a regular get my blood drawn regularly. I'm always tweaking here and there. And so it's tweaking the workouts. Then it was a different type of workout. And then the varying the workout. So you shock your muscles, and then it's, what you put in your body. And then I got into looking at my sleep going, my sleep's not as effective. So what do? I'm going to put my phone away for a certain time. I'm not going to take melatonin because my body gets used to it. I'm going to train my body, whatever. I'm going to make sure I work out at a certain time. I'm going to do a sauna because that helps, followed by, all these little things. And just little by little by little by little. And now it's more effective. Hopefully in 5 years, I'll be able to tell you 3 or 4 or 5 new things that I've learned over time. And it's just dialing it in. And we do that in certain, you pick the most important areas, whatever they are. Is it your marriage? Then get good at it. Is it your spiritual life? Then dial it in. Is it your body or physical health? Then figure it out. Is it your leadership? Figure it out. Is it managing your money? Figure it out. Is it parenting or being involved in your grandkids' life? Whatever it is. So just pick an area and slowly, faithfully grow in it, little by little by little by little. And then you'll wake up and you'll look back and go, wow, we've actually come a long way.
That's a really good set of advice, because I can see people saying, I got to change everything. I got to change my marriage. I got to change money. I got to change my health, what I'm eating, working out.
Pick one and do one thing. One thing. Pick one and do one thing.
Floss your teeth.
That's what we do with our teams right now. Is I don't want a campus pastor coming back with 3 goals, because what does 3 goals equal? Not much.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, because this is an area that I'm very interested in, can we talk about dialing in your sleep habits? That is something I've worked very hard on over the last 4 or 5 years and have made a lot of improvements. And the reason it's so important to me is when I burned out 17 years ago now, that's crazy. It was largely running around like a chicken with my head cut off, rapidly growing church, no boundaries, cheated my family, and ran out of gas. My body's like, well, you won't stop, so I will. And I was so exhausted. And now I'm in a very different place, but it's been like nerdy kind of stuff that I'm doing. I'd love to know what you're learning about sleep.
Well, I think I would probably learn from you, because I'm in the newer stages of learning, meaning like 3 years of kind of dialing it in, and so you might be way more down the road.
I'd love to hear. Yeah.
So it's quite a few things. What I know is having your hormones right or wrong impacts your sleep. What I know is that your diet, when you eat, what you eat, impacts your sleep. At my age, and I drink a gallon of water a day. If I do that at 10 o'clock at night,
I have to start limiting what I drink after 8 p.m.
That impacts your sleep. What I know is that your digital screen consumption impacts your sleep. Whatever you're thinking about before bed impacts your sleep. If you do a sauna or an ice bath, if you work out or not, the rhythms of your body impacts your sleep. Your body likes rhythms. Some people need more sleep. What you want to do is determine how much you need. Oddly enough, for whatever reason, I function real well with about 6 hours of sleep. And I cannot seem to sleep 8. It just doesn't. I just wake up and I'm ready to go and I feel good every day. Some people, you need 8. And so what you need to do is, there's not a right or wrong, but you got to find out how much do you need. And what I've found is all those things I've talked about, if I stop eating at a certain time, put my phone away at a certain time, don't watch TV at a certain time, stop talking on the phone at a certain time, stop having certain types of conversations at the same time, don't read a leadership book at the last minute so my mind's going. If I've got a notepad by my bed. If I have a thought, I write it on there, because what I do is I get it off my mind. And so it goes away. My phone's in the other room, and so there, any bings aren't going to get me. And I mean, literally it's in 2 rooms away. So my phone's not getting me. And then if I go to bed at a certain time and I wake up around the same time, my body's getting in the rhythm. So my kids are teenagers. They're in bed at 2 o'clock one night and 10 o'clock the next, and sleep until 4 in the afternoon. And so there's no rhythm. And a lot of people live like that. And if you want, I believe one of the most important investments you can make is learning how to create good sleep rhythms, because that's one of the biggest returns on your mental health, your physical health, your productivity, your relationships. So like I said, I'm early in the development. You could probably add to it things that I don't know yet. And
very similar, very, very similar. I try not to look at my phone for an hour before bed. Tony and I'll often just watch a sitcom or something like that for a half hour and, maybe around 9 o'clock, be in bed, lights out by 10. And it's interesting. I was a 6-hour a night person no matter what I did. And then over the pandemic, I really said, no, I'm not going to pride myself at 4 a.m. anymore. I'm going to try to see how much sleep my body needs. And it's easiest on vacation because then you don't have anything to really wake up for. What I've discovered is I've trained my body to take 7 hours, 7.5 hours, 8 hours. I feel so much better, Craig. I mean, my book, At Your Best, right now I'm in my red zone. It's 4:30 in the afternoon. When we booked it, I'm like, well, I got Craig. I'm going to do this. But normally I would say no. I had a great sleep last night, had a little lie down siesta at lunch, and I'm good to go. Took a half hour to unplug my brain before we talk so that I wasn't swirling with all kinds of thoughts. Just, did a little bit of mindless work. And I find that gear down is really helpful. I sleep with my phone in this office and we're 2 floors up in my house in the bedroom. A lot of very similar things. Have you read, and we're really nerding out here, but we're nerding out. I adopted this weird sleep position thing by a guy named Nick Littlehays, I think was his name. I could have that totally wrong. The book I think is called Sleep. And basically, you have to figure out if you're right-handed. I'm right-handed. Are you right or left?
I'm right-handed.
Right-handed. So you sleep on your left side in almost the fetal position with your hands out like this, and then your knees a little bit bent. That increased, because I track it with my Oura Ring and also my Apple Watch, that increased my deep sleep by double overnight. I used to be a back sleeper. And there's something about that semi-fetal position on your opposite side to your dominant hand that has made a huge difference. So I'm nerding. I'm really a pillow guy now. So I like a good solid pillow, not these little pancakes that pass as pillows. So temperature, really important.
Yes.
Are you a cold or a hot sleeper? I prefer it to be about 60, 63.
Yeah, I'm not, my wife would probably leave me over that. And
yes.
So, yeah.
That is a challenge, isn't it?
It is a challenge. Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting because I was trained to sleep on my back with a certain type of pillow, which is a different type, and even the mattress. And so that's new to me. And from what I understand, cold is better for sleeping. From what
you can get those. They're really expensive. We haven't got one, but you can get I think 8 Sleep does them, or companies like that, where you can turn the bed temperature to different temperatures.
That's interesting. I wanted to invent, and this may already be out, but Amy likes in the winter these real thick, it's like sleeping in a robe, and I hate those sheets. So I want to make one that's 50% my sheet and 50% her robe sheet. And I don't have time for that. But if it's out there, someone send me the link. And if not, someone can take the idea, and I'll just be a customer.
Buy more.
Yeah, I'll be a customer.
I'll be a customer for that. You know what we did? We bought, if someone says, what's the best under $100 purchase? I went to a local store, I think it's a Canadian chain, bought an inexpensive synthetic down duvet for our bed, because we were having blanket wars. Like, Tony wants lots and she was always cold and I was always hot. It's this $89 Faco duvet. She is hot and I'm cold. I don't know what that is, but it works, and we are thrilled. So
interesting. Good.
Managed to get on that. But yeah, all that stuff. Why do I care so much? Because it makes a huge difference about how we're feeling at this time of the afternoon. Does it not?
It does. It does. 100%. Yeah.
And when you're writing, okay, well, that's good. You mentioned James Clear. You mentioned Charles Duhigg. So other books on habits, James's, we just had him on the show. He's sold over 10 million copies, which is incredible. And I know you're a fan.
Yes.
You've applied a lot of those principles. What is different about The Power to Change? What is the unique contribution there? Yeah,
well, I would have to say, there's no way I would say is better than his book, because his book is a classic. I mean, it really is truly a modern day classic, and it just is worthy of that. So I think a difference would be that it's written from a solely Christian perspective. And, I've had James on my podcast as well, and I don't know his spiritual background or beliefs. His content is phenomenal and stands on its own. But what I want to do in my book that might make it a little bit different is, rather than just talking about, and not to say his is only behavior modification, because it's not, but most people, when they approach change, they're attempting behavior modification. And what I'm trying to get at is real spiritual transformation. Because if you change a behavior without changing the heart, the behavior doesn't last. And so what we want to do is we want to start more with identity, and not just in identity to have a certain goal, but to have a Christ-centered identity that will help drive our behaviors, and then our behaviors will reinforce that identity. I think that would be a little bit of a differentiating factor from a lot of other books on habits. And I think it could complement a lot of the good works that are already out there.
That's what I loved about it. I mean, James does talk about identity in the formation of habits. Mm-hmm. Who do we want to become? But you start there, and then you take the spiritual angle. And I love that. Do you want to talk about identity and how you see that in shaping habits? Because I think it's so important.
It is ridiculously important. So why is it that we do what we do? If we got good habits or we got unhealthy habits, why do we do what we do? There are many secondary reasons. But I'm going to give you the secondary reasons so we can acknowledge them, and then we'll deal with the primary reason, which is the one that most people overlook. Secondary reasons is because we're obligated. We have to do this. Our doctor told me, or whatever. I got to do this for school. We're obligated. Another reason is because we actually choose it. We want to, meaning like, I want to honor God with this. I want to get up and run. I want to eat right. But we choose it. Another reason would be we want to be popular. We want to be liked. We want to fit in. This is, builds credibility. So those are some of, and there are other secondary reasons. The primary reason that we do what we do, why do you do what you do? The primary reason is because you do what you do because of what you think of you. That's why you do what you do. And so if you want to change what you think of, if we want to change what you do, then you have to change what you think of you. And so that's why it's not just that I want to become this type of person, but more than that is I want to become who God sees me as and who he says that I am. And then if you want to have godly habits, you want to start with a God-honoring character. And out of that, the right habits are going to come. And so I want to try to help people start with a Christ-centered identity. And then the right habits will tend to come out of that. So if this is the type of person God wants me to be, what kind of habits does a person like that do? And then what I'm doing in the book is teach them to let's just start one, or let's break one and start there. And this is a little bit of a differentiating factor is that we're only doing one, and you can do one. And once you do one long enough, then that starts to reinforce your God-honoring identity. And then we take another one on them. We compound over time. And we look in, about the value of community in this. We look about literally the spiritual power, meaning that our willpower wanes. We know that, right? You can get decision fatigue. And so how do we very practically and spiritually tap into a very real power from heaven and make that work in our favor? And it's not just a sermon, but it's a way of life, and it's God's power. And so I think I'm really optimistic that if people have a really open mind to think in a different way, that it's going to create a lot of good life change in people.
I love that about the book, Craig, because you really emphasize it's who you want to become. And you and I have talked about this, but like I had a moment. So I literally joined a program last May called Ditch Your Dad Bod. So back to what you were saying.
I like the title.
And I'm doing, it's so good. And I'm doing strength training, seriously, for the first time in my life. A lot of body weight stuff because I'm on the road a lot, et cetera, et cetera.
Which is brilliant and effective.
It's really good, and it's really challenging. I mean, 80 push-ups, like good luck.
Yep.
Go for that. It's hard. And it was a year ago. You and I will be in the same place in a few weeks where we'll have some downtime together, et cetera, et cetera. But a year ago, if you would have said, hey, come work out with me, I would have been like, dude, I'm busy that morning, Craig, thanks. Just intimidated, imposter syndrome, couldn't do it. Now I'd be like, yeah, I think I'm going to go to the gym.
Good.
Like, I think I will do it that morning. And I'll just do my thing. I'm not going to be at the level of other people in the gym. But there was a moment last fall where, I'm trying to lose weight. I've lost about 10, 15 pounds, which is great. But where it went from, I'm doing these exercises 4 times a week in order to lose weight to simply, no, I'm just working out.
Yes.
And I got
that's
rid
when
of
you win. That's
two.
when you win. Yes.
That's when you win. And it's a habit. And I switched it because, I wrote a book on this. I'm like, don't exercise in your green zone your best time of day unless you're trying out for the Olympics. And then I noticed that by the time I got to 4:00, I was too tired to work out. So I moved it to the morning. And now it's part of my morning routine. So I got to rewrite the book. But, it just changed so much. And it's a little bit like what Seth Godin says. And I know you follow Seth, but like people like us do things like this.
Right.
And this is what fit people do. And I want to be a fit person. When I'm 70, I want to be fit. When I'm 80, I want to be fit. I want to have mobility, agility, strength, etc. Do you see that flip? And that goes back to imposter syndrome too, where you're like, yeah, I may not be the strongest guy in the gym, but I belong here.
Yeah.
And can you talk about that pivot and how it operates?
Yeah. So I would say and we talk about this in the book, The Power to Change. There's a little bit of different mindset. What a lot of people do is they're like saying, I'm trying to lose weight. I'm trying to quit hitting snooze. I'm trying to get more organized at the office. And I would say this, that's not born out of an identity, that's born out of an attempt. And to try is kind of like, when I'm trying, it's kind of like a half-hearted attempt with an excuse to bail, meaning I'm going to try, but I might not. So I would just tell people like, stop trying and start training. Very, very simple change, but stop trying to get better at something and start training. When you train, you're becoming better at something that you already are. Okay, if I'm a runner in training, what did I do? I bought the shoes, I got the app, I'm watching the commercials, I'm reading the book, I'm studying other people, I've got the tan lines in the right places, I got the right running shorts, so I know the running routes or whatever, I know the best place in town, because I'm not trying to learn to run, but I'm a runner in training. And that's what happened to you, is somewhere along the way, you stopped trying to lose weight and you became someone who works out. That's identity. And what we want to do is, again, like, I'm not a big believer in outcome goals at all. The problem with outcome goals is I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to get out of debt, or, I want to be speaking at some conference or write a book, is that you don't win until you achieve the goal. And there are so many goals in life that you don't achieve for months or even years or decades. And so it takes a long time to win. Well, when the goal isn't out there, but the goal is training today, then you get to win today. Meaning, what'd you do? You went to the gym today and you trained, and that's a win today. And so you aren't successful in the future when you achieve some goal. You're successful when you're faithful and you train today. And that's just a little, it sounds almost like a play on words, but it is not. For example, I was taking flying lessons, trying to become a pilot. And what happened to me one time, my instructor asked me, what's the weather going to be tomorrow? And I pulled up the weather app. I didn't pull up the pilot's app, which has better weather. I pulled up the weather app. And he looked at me and he said, close that app. He goes, are you a pilot or not? And I thought, well, I don't have my pilot's license yet, but I have done a solo. I said, you know what? I'm a pilot. What does a pilot do? A pilot pulls up the pilot's app. We look at a more sophisticated way. That's what we do. And so and that was the moment in my mind where it happened, Carey, is I wasn't trying to learn to fly. I was a pilot at that moment. Okay. I got my license later, but I was already a pilot. I'm getting my instrument rating now. I'm just a better pilot. I'm training to become a better pilot, but that's the difference. And that's what happened to you, is you stopped trying to lose weight and you became a person who works out. Stop trying, start training.
And that kind of leads to what some people call the law of the harvest, that you reap what you sow. And you and I have lived a number of decades now where I kind of knew about it in my 20s, but you see it in your 50s. Like,
you do.
Bad things get worse good things get better.
Yep.
I always thought that all your problems were worked out by the time you hit 50 or 60. And then I realized, no, they just compound.
You
if you don't
discover
deal
the
with
problems
them.
you created.
Do you ever?
Yeah.
Can you talk about that, the sowing and reaping? And because you have a great section in the Power to Change on that as well.
Thank you. Well, this is not a principle I did not make up. Obviously, there was someone
Paul wrote about it or
a couple
something.
thousand years ago. There were some that went before us that wrote about it. But some of the principles in sowing and reaping and these are not original to me, but you reap what you sow. So like if you reap good disciplines, you reap a good harvest. If you reap sloppy disciplines, you have a bad harvest. You typically reap where you sow. So if you sow into relationships, you have better relationships. If you sow into your leadership, you tend to have better leadership. You reap more than you sow, meaning if you plant a seed, you get a bigger harvest. And if you plant the right seeds, the right disciplines, you tend to get a really, really a better harvest. And so those are some principles. And if you go way back to right before we started Life.Church 28-ish years ago, I was meeting with a mentor, and he said a couple things to me. One is he said, God's going to break you, which I didn't like that part, but he said that. And then two, he said, and I never will forget, he said that you'll vastly overestimate what you can do in the short run, which was so true. Like year one, we had 125 people coming, and I wanted 300 people. And I was so upset there wasn't more people, He said, you'll vastly overestimate what you can do in the short run. And he said, but you'll also vastly underestimate what God can do through a lifetime of faithfulness. And that, what he said then, I didn't have the capacity at that age to really understand what it meant, but I'm having more at this age, the ability to see that is so true, that a God-honoring life, a life of great impact like you, one of the things I love about you is that you were doing what you did before anyone knew who you were.
Not much has changed.
Meaning and what I loved about you is like you scrapped your way into real influence with nothing but good content. I would find you, I'd be Googling something, and I'd come across your webpage, and I'd read the article, and I'd go, that was good. I read 12 bad ones, and that one was good. 6 months later, I'd find you again. I go, who is this guy? This is good content. And what you did, Carey, is you were really faithful, doing the hard work back when you didn't have a big audience. And a little bit here and a lot of research there and a lot of hours here and a lot of discipline there and hard work for years when nobody was listening, you were putting seeds in the ground. And those started to come up. And now here you are 15, 20 years later, and you have real influence. And that's sowing and reaping. That's what you did. You sowed. Nobody noticed. You kept sowing. You showed back up. You sowed. And then you had a little harvest, and then you had a bigger harvest. Now you got a massive harvest. And so I would just say, there's probably somebody jogging on a treadmill listening right now or driving on a commute or something, and you think, just not getting there. There's a real powerful scripture, don't grow weary in doing good, for you'll reap a harvest if you don't give up. Don't give up. Just keep doing the right things. It's the small things that no one sees that bring about the big results that everyone wants. It's not what you do occasionally that makes the difference. It's what you do consistently. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to master the habits that matter most. We're going to invest in the right places, and we are going to make a difference. It may not be in 6 months, but in 6 years, watch out. In 3 decades, get ready.
I appreciate you saying that, and you see that too if you're an investor, what you put in versus what you have, very small difference in the first year or two. Sometimes it goes down.
So it's boring and it doesn't work at first. Yeah. And you may be down in year two, but you invest a little bit in the market year over year, a little bit consistently, dollar cost averaging over a 7-year period, you're probably going to be pretty happy.
Yep. And then over a 30-year period, oh my gosh,
you're going to be, if you're not generous, you're selfish, because you should be generous over a 30-year period.
Yeah. Where are you sowing right now? What areas of your life are you sowing into? When you think about your life a decade, 2 decades from now, where are you in particular planting seeds that you hope you will be able to harvest?
It's a great question. So oddly enough, for the first time in a long time, I took on what I call kind of a newer close friend, meaning for years, I kind of felt like my inner circle friendship was full. And then one day I realized, well, that's kind of dumb. Like, why would you limit something good? And I made a new friend with a person that I both learn from like crazy. It's very mutual. And I'm able to invest in toward ministry. It's a great business person that's kind of bored with business and wants to do more ministry. So that's a mutual sowing into a friendship there. And then the younger team on our church is just kind of an ongoing conversation. How do we both like pour into them, because there's no way to fast track wisdom. It just takes experience to get wisdom. So you can be talented, but you got to develop wisdom. And so how do we share wisdom with the younger generation? And then also, like, how do we get around them just so we learn? So it's mutual, meaning there's so much that I need to learn from how they think, how they relate, how they learn, why they like certain things, why they don't, what makes sense to them, how they process, how they mature spiritually. And so I'd say one is I'm investing just in a friend who's also investing in me. And then two, it's the younger leaders, because I'm 55 years of age. And so at some point, we need to be handing off more and more and more and more and more. And I don't want to wait until everyone says, why hadn't he gone out to the pasture yet? I want to be developing that now. And I'd say we have more to do. It's like, it's not easy, and it takes a lot of work, a lot of time. And that's something that is a priority and needs to become even more of a priority as the days move forward.
No, those are good areas to invest in. It's funny, I'm also thinking about that. One of my good friends is a doctor specializing in mental health, and his name's Rob, and Rob would agree with the Harvard study, that longitudinal study that's been going on since 1938, that by the time you hit 75 or 80, the only thing that really matters is relationships. The quality of your life is the quality of your relationships. Yes. And a lot of times in leadership, we sacrifice that. How hard is it for you to make friends leading something as large as Life.Church?
Well, I would say that, kind of like I said, I have a very strong, very intimate 30-year friendship bank with multiple friends. And they're kind of almost like different categories of friends. Like, one is someone that knew me before Life.Church. One is someone who's been a mentor to me, kind of in the business leadership end. One of them is just kind of like a spiritual friend and mentor, kind of like a prayer partner and accountability partner. And so those are very, very rich, very long-term, very meaningful. And I would say that, is it hard for someone to make those friends? Is as hard as you make it? Meaning, do you have to take risks? Yes. Do you have to invest time? Yes. Can you get hurt? Yes. Do you have to work through things? Yes. But once it's been tested, and all these friendships have been tested, meaning we had events that could have ended the friendship, right? And once they were tested and they stood the test, then they go to a whole nother level, going like, these are friends for life. And if you can get, I would say, like, in my opinion, and not as an expert, I would say you need 3 to 5 of those. So I would say I have kind of in that range. I would have like a solid 5 that would be really close. I thought that's enough. Like, I really don't have the capacity for more. Well, then one day I thought that's kind of limiting. And it came through flying that I made a friend with another guy through a new activity, and it's a new dimension. And so I can take on another friend. And that's, I would say, don't ever limit the capacity to give to somebody and to receive from somebody. And if you don't have those friendships, they're not likely to come by accident. You've got to just go out there and you got to make them. And you got to make time. You got to invite people to things. And it's crazy how close you can get to someone. It takes frequency of interaction. It does. You have to interact, and you have to intentionally do it. And so that's just, you do it. If you don't have that, you're robbing people of the blessing that you have to give, and you're limiting yourself because you're not receiving from others, and you're not get to enjoy the best parts of life.
So we've mentioned flossing your teeth was a keystone habit for you. When you're advising leaders on this, I'm sure habits can be as varied as the people listening to this podcast, but there's got to be 4 or 5 that are just like Archimedes levers. You know what I mean? Like they just kind of really, if you get this under control, like diet might be one of them, or exercise might be one of them. If there's 4 or 5, like a short list of habits where somebody listening to this is like, yeah, I don't know where to start, Craig. Do you have like a frequent flyer, highly recommend try starting here or experiment with these habits as a way of getting started to become more disciplined?
So that's a fascinating question. And I've nerded out and obsessed with this for years, and no one's ever asked a question like that. So let me tell you what comes to mind. I would say there's a couple that come to mind. One would be that you have to create your own version of the habit of learning. You have to, and what does that look like? It has to be learning that you have to have the habit. I would say another one is you have to have the habit of training your thinking. Matters so much. You've got to recognize where your thoughts are your enemies, and you've got to replace those thoughts with truth. So that would say, and then I would also have to say, I'd say if you're going to choose 3, you have to have the habit of friendships, because there's no way to ever adequately say like anything that's good in my life, I did not achieve by myself. I learned it from someone else, and someone else helped me get there. And this is, you are who you run with, period. And so I would say those things long before what you eat, because what you learn, how you think, and who you're with will determine what you eat. What you learn, how you think, and who you're with will determine how you manage your money. What you learn, someone write this down, because I like this.
Yeah, I'm really writing this down too.
I mean, seriously, like, it's like, and I didn't mean to get this lucky with my answer, but is a lucky answer, but it just came to mind, is you got to learn. You got to be a student. You got to learn. You're going to ask more questions. And what you learn determines how you sleep, how you eat, how you read the Bible, how you have a marriage, how you think determines what you do. Who you're with impacts every area of your life. So, man, I'm glad you asked that. Because
there you go. I'm glad I asked it too.
The answer is probably more powerful and profound than I would have ever expected, but I would recommend the habit of learning, the habit of training your thoughts, and the habit of choosing your friendships, and that's what I'd recommend.
No, that's good. I mean, if you want to know how to train your thoughts, please read Craig's book, Winning the War in Your Mind. I mean, that's the classic. That is the classic in that area. What are your learning disciplines?
My learning disciplines. Okay. You're my friend. When we talk, what do?
We share ideas. We share resources. Have you read this book? Have you looked at this? Have you listened to this?
Time.
Have you seen this? Every single time.
What did you send me this week?
Yeah. After condolences about your dad, I said, hey, I listened to these 2 shows recently. I think they're fantastic. I don't think they'll waste your time. Okay.
So I want the people in the room to shout out, who did I send those podcasts to? You gotta be loud so I'll hear you. Okay. That one person was loud, one wasn't, but there's 2 people in this room that I sent the podcast to. Why? Because it was fantastic. And I got that from you. Okay. I was at dinner last night with someone else who showed me a new kind of a medical technique that was pretty phenomenal. And, he had shingles like I had, so I learned from him. And we talked about an investment that we're going to look in together. And that's, it's the people that you're with. The resource
which ties into friends, which, it's that was a Jim Rohn club.
There's no way I can go find the best podcast to listen to on my own. But if I've got 15 friends like you that are all students of something I'm interested in, every time we're together, what's the best thing you've read? What's the best thing you're listening to? Send me an article, and then we're going to grow. So my discipline of learning, and it's maximizing downtime, meaning when I'm driving into work, I'm listening to podcasts. If I'm on the treadmill, I'm listening to something, I'm watching something. So when other people might be watching a Netflix show, I'm listening to a podcast you recommended to me. So I'm maximizing downtime to train, to help expose my mind to broader thoughts.
No, and you're right about friends too. And there's, that's worth a drill down too. You're 3 to 5, then you're 10 to 15, and then the other 150. That's Dunbar's number. So wrote about that in my last book. But anyway, You called me out of the blue last fall. We had talked a number of different times, and I was working through the big vision shift, right? And reversing the decline in the church, helping leaders identify and scale their next growth barrier, which is what we're about now moving forward, just some clarity. But you said something that I will take to my grave, because I talked about serving business leaders. And I talked to numerous people. You and I chatted about it a little bit, texted back and forth, trying to figure this out. And you said your last words before I hung up were, Carey, I don't think anyone's ever regretted investing their life in the future of the church. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, boom, that's it. That's it. Like, if we didn't have that relationship, I wouldn't have gotten that advice. I'm going to carry that with me for the rest of my life. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for doing it too. Your impact goes beyond that, but there's a whole lot of people pretty good at building business leaders. And there's a few people great at building churches, and ultimately businesses will come and businesses will go, but the church endures forever, the body of Christ. So you're investing in eternity. So good choice.
Craig, I got to tell you, this is fantastic. It's never, ever boring. It's always sharpening. And the 3 habits that make a big difference. Dude, you got to do like a little mini book, an addendum to that or something.
I don't know if that was as powerful as I thought. I got excited about it at the moment, but maybe because it just came to me, but that's how I do think those things matter. That if you can get the habit of those things, everything else will fall into place. And that was kind of the realization that I had too, is like anything good I have either came out of something I learned or changing how I think or from a relationship. And there's nothing good or effective in my life that didn't come from one or a combination of those things.
That's fantastic. So the book is out. Tell us about obviously you can get it anywhere you can get books, but anything special you want people to look at or direct them to?
And I actually want to clean up one thing I just said, because I said businesses come and go. I actually want to just be super, super, super clear that in business, people can have incredible ministries, and I don't want to devalue that. And I also think that multiplying resources is very God-honoring. So I didn't want that to come across as demeaning, but what I wanted to say is the gift I see in you, I think, is incredibly valuable in the church. So I have such a heart. I just wanted to clean that up, because I don't want to imply something that's not in my heart. On the book,
I didn't hear it that way, but it's
no,
a good
you didn't. But I just there's we in the church world need to value what the ministry that people do in the business world is very important, and so I want to
so much to learn from them.
You're not kidding. That's we've been talking about all day, right?
I know. Totally.
So I would just say on the book, The Power to Change, I would just invite people to see change in a different way. That not only are we going to be practical and use science, but we're going to let Scripture work in our lives. And if there is something in your life, that one thing, like I just can't lose the weight, or I'm just never good with money, or I'm just never going to have an intimate relationship, I would just say, let's stop right there and grab that thought and take it captive and say, you can do what God calls you to do. You have what you need to do what He calls you to do. So let's believe you can change. You can become more effective. Your church can grow. You can reach more people. You can be a better youth pastor. You can be a more effective friend. Just start there with that belief and the hope, and then watch as little changes over time create a big impact. And I promise you, it's God honoring, and God will give you the power. And you, here it goes. You have the power to change, right?
I got to say one more thing about the book too, because you sent me an early copy. It's super easy to read.
Good,
I reviewed it again, getting ready for this. The chapters, if you're worried about, I don't have time for a 400-page book. It's not a 400-page book. Chapters are super short. They're very practical. If you get a paper copy, like you just write out, like there's exercises at the end of everything. So if you're looking for something that you could work through fairly quickly, it's a fantastic book.
Thank you.
Craig, I'll make sure you subscribe to Craig's Leadership Podcast. I never miss an episode. And you're over at Life.Church and CraigGroeschel.com. Is that it?
All good.
All
yes,
right.
sir. Yeah.
All right. Well, Craig, thank you so much for being with us again. So appreciate you.
Looking forward to working out with you. It's going to be fun.
That's going to be great.
Let's do it. Okay. Thanks so much, Carey.
There's a new movement happening in the country to reclaim the promise of Jesus' unconditional love and grace, and to see His church rise above the culture war. He gets us, hopes to give it a voice. The biggest faith campaign in history, He Gets Us invites a rapidly growing audience, from spiritual explorers to like-minded Christians, to reconsider the radical life of Jesus. Whether people believe Jesus was God or just a man, they're invited to consider His example for themselves.